This is the Convene podcast. My name is Maggie, Digital Media Editor. Welcome to another episode of the Convene Talk. Curt, tell our listeners more about today's topic.
Hello, listeners. Today we're going to talk about our July-August cover story, which was about sacred cows in the events industry. Those are the things that we do that maybe don't really work anymore, but we just do them because we've always done them. And maybe we should find a way to fix or change them to make the experiences better for everyone, for our exhibitors and our planners and our participants and all those folks. And what I thought was fun about this story is the way that we did it before we get into what we discovered. But we did the salary survey. And in the salary survey, Maggie asked people about what their sacred cows were, right? Maybe that's how you didn't call it that, but you just said.
Oh, I actually did call it that.
Oh, okay.
I did use sacred cows with a little explanation for those that might not be familiar.
Yeah. And we had like 500 people respond to that. And I remember the initial list had some kind of funny responses in there, but we kind of culled it down to things that we could actually print. And then we also, each of us reached out to people who we know, planners we know, or planners, that we wanted to ask them to both tell us what their sacred cows, what they thought the sacred cows were, and how they would go about fixing it, or examples of how they've done that or an organization they work for has fixed it. And we got this really good mix, different things, but they talked about everything from networking to how we set up a meeting room to some of the others. Keynote speeches that aren't participatory, F&B, and coffee even, or where to serve coffee, award ceremonies, and all kinds of things like that. So we split everything up into 3 categories: structure and programming, exhibits, and food and beverage. And it's in the July-August issue, and it's now online as well for you to read. But I'll let everybody else take over and talk about some of the things they discovered, because I think everybody has their own little interesting spin. Who wants to say anything? Anybody?
I'll go first. I reached out to Liz Lathan, who is a veteran in the industry. She's a CMP and co-founder and CMO of the Community Factory. And when I asked her what her sacred cow was, she knew exactly what she was going to say, which was panel discussions. And I think that's something that a lot of people feel similarly about when it comes to things at events that could use a bit of a shakeup. She said there could not be a more useless session in all of the conference dome, the way most of them are run. Let's put 3 curated professionals, but make sure 2 of them are sponsors and 1 is a customer, in an uncomfortable chairs with preset questions they've all rehearsed answers to. So her idea of kind of making that more engaging and interesting and spontaneous was to bring people together with different perspectives who know what the conversation will be, but don't have, a sneak peek into what the exact questions are and have time to prepare their answers. And to kind of get them together beforehand to spark some chemistry before they go on stage together. And then kind of get rid of the awkward setup of just having them sit in a line at a table or something that looks uncomfortable and stilted, and have it more TV talk show style. So that way there's a more engaging conversation. So I really liked her ideas. I like that she provided some answers to some of the issues that she had with panels. Barbara, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Casey. Yeah. One of the things that really caught my attention was the story that Michelle Russell, the editor-in-chief, wrote about a concept called huddles that was held in lieu of booths and the traditional trade show, where people could meet with, people who were selling, but also they met with other experts, technologists, and just, all experts that were adjacent to the topic. And there were two things that I thought were just great about this. One is that when I was talking to Ken Holsinger from Freeman earlier this year about a survey they did about what attendees want. And one of the statistics that came out of that is that 81% of the people surveyed said that the kinds of interactions that are most important to them at events were interacting with experts. And it kind of speaks a little bit to your panel, to Liz's critique of panels. It's just like, people up there and then, people in the audience. And so I thought that sounded really like a compelling thing that I would love to do, the huddles. But another aspect of it is that it eliminates all of the physical stuff around. It's very sustainable. Instead of everyone shipping booths and shipping all of the things that are on the exhibit hall. I just thought eliminating that would would be a great step forward towards eliminating waste. Jen, what are you thinking?
I just wanted to say I agree with you. I feel like one of the themes I feel like I saw come out of all of the responses we had, regardless of like the category or topic, was basically like, let's cut through the crap, excuse my French, to make way for more meaningful connection. And I'll read, I reached out to Megan. Apologies, Megan, if I'm mispronouncing your last name. I think it's Fennel, who is Senior Director of Strategy and Insights at Freeman. And I asked her, like, just generally, what's a sacred cow you think should be scrapped? And I didn't really assign her like a category or topic. And the one that she kind of honed in on was networking. And she said, the days of throwing people together in a room with a glass of wine and piece of cheese don't cut it for networking anymore. Attendees are telling us through our trends research that they want more meaningful connection. To them, this means solving professional challenges together, which I think speaks to what you were just talking about with getting to actually interact with experts, as well as common and personal interest meetups and hands-on topical roundtable discussion groups. So I feel like I just see a theme there just kind of emerging out of all the different areas that we talk to event professionals about. And it also kind of alludes to our next cover story all about networking too, which I think is interesting. That story kind of feels like it was a nice segue from this piece.
What you said about the exhibits, I talked to Davi Kauer, I think that's how you say it, who now is the CEO of the European Society of Emergency Medicine. And she talked about how exhibit halls have become kind of staid and sort of the same, and not so exciting anymore. And at their events, they do something where they have these little contests, or they call them cups, a Euro Sim Cup and the Paramedics Cup, where they have paramedics and other people who are delegates at the thing get together in teams, and they do a disaster medicine scenarios where they take on the scenario and they save people's lives or dummies' lives and things like that. And she said that they do it in the middle of the exhibition space so that there's something happening that sort of feeds the conversation, and sort of ignites activity and networking in that way. And I think the exhibits were one of the big targets of this of our responses, were how to deal with exhibit halls. And in fact, one of the people Michelle talked to, I think Matthew Fox from Scoop News Group, or was that you, Jen?
Yeah, it's a A friend of mine, yeah, he had a lot to say on that. That seems
I
to
mean,
be
he
like
just
a real
basically said,
point.
let's get rid of them.
Well, he had a very interesting, what he does is a little bit different, like what the types of events that he does. And so I think what he was pointing out is like for corporate events or for events where exhibits aren't like a main portion and they're just kind of like, a side dish really to the event. If it's not really integral, does it need to be there? He was kind of saying like, I think the way that it's set up for his event, it's just like portion of a space in his meeting, and it kind of feels like to him, like I think he was saying, I feel like it's if unless it has to be there and needs to be there and people want it to be there, does it need to be there? There might be better options for sponsors than just your kind of typical exhibit hall. So I think in those cases, it's interesting. Maybe there's more creative ideas to get your sponsors and exhibitors or people who want to engage with your audience. There's better ideas out there, is what he was trying to say, or what he did say. Not that he didn't say anything, not that he didn't express that himself.
All right. Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, just as you're talking, like I think kind of the theme through all of this is to think about it. I think that people just do things on autopilot. And, as we're talking about exhibits, the answer is not, I don't think, to just like, yeah, no exhibits. Because I feel like there's definitely some sectors where the hands-on and the actually interacting physically with something is important. But then to have an exhibit where basically someone is standing there, handing out chocolates and brochures is a totally different thing. So I just saw this big theme, not only to think about it, but also event organizers having the authority and the agency to change things. Like I think that's kind of the next thing is how do people change things when, if they are not don't have the ability to direct everything. So I think that's a good area to think about. Yeah, Casey, what's on your mind about this?
Just kind of going off of what you were saying about being more thoughtful, particularly about how you incorporate the hands-on aspect of exhibit halls into the meeting experience. When I talked to Sharon Washington, who has spoken at a number of PCMA events, and she's a communication and marketing strategist. So she has the attendee experience, but also the speaker experience. And her idea was to sort of incorporate some of the expo flair, she called it, into seminar rooms. So not necessarily have sponsors selling their products there, but maybe incorporating their technology into the talks and finding ways to make it a more engaging back and forth with the audience and not just talking at them. I feel like a big theme of what we're all saying is attendees don't want to be talked at and speakers don't want to be talking at people who aren't engaging with them and who aren't responding to them. So finding those touch points of how to better connect the two sides of any meeting is really helpful and important. Maggie?
I just wanted to kind of follow also what Barbara said and what you were saying now. What's the next step after all this, right? And something that caught my eye and didn't make it to the cover story came from the salary survey. And there, of course, the responses are anonymous and we didn't have the answer of how would you change that. But we got a few responses that caught my eye and they were focused on how we are as an industry. And there was one response that said, planners have to be on for 16 hours a day while the program operates. And that's something they would like to see disappear. And the person also wrote, we could split duties, coverage, give breaks midday to help us be more mindful of our health and lessen burnout, which I think was very good. And there was some more on, the industry as a whole, that more is more. And I think, and the person elaborated that being overworked is just part of the industry. And I think they correlate to the rest of the sacred cows that were in the cover story, right? That we are always trying to be everywhere, do something bigger and more. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, now there's so much out there. How is that actually consumed by attendees? And I loved one that said, not everyone has to be young to do this job well. People with experience should be valued and paid accordingly. And there was more on the fact that the people in the industry are underpaid. So I think these are also things that we as an industry have to think more about, not only how to, slaughter the sacred cows, but how to do it mindfully while taking care of ourselves as event professionals, which I think was very good. Maybe a future cover story. Who knows? Curt?
Yeah, what you were talking about, taking care of ourselves. I think that, and also what was said in some of the salary survey responses. I think that one of the people, Albert Garcia, he said, no to rigid schedules, cookie cutter formats, tedious event registration processes, add fluidity and speed, no more panels with the same people with alarm keynotes. And he sort of goes on and on and on. Prioritize human connections, keep the peer-to-peer engagement, but please also add exchange with other professionals from other industries. And then he goes on to talk about how event professionals juggle impossible demands and unrealistic expectations. This sounds exactly like what you just said. But I think that that's true. And I think that event professionals are going to have a hard time doing that when attendees seem to always want more, it seems like. I mean, it seems like everybody's racing to outdo what they did the last time, even though you don't have as much money or your money's not going as far as it did the last time because everything's so much more expensive. You can't get buy-in maybe from the leadership of your company for some things. And sometimes it's just like the unrealistic expectations of participants. You don't want to hear from a participant, oh, that really was not worth my time or something like that. So it's kind of interesting that everyone needs to be mindful and experiment and think deeply about all that kind of stuff. And even that's probably hard on the job, or probably a hard part of the job. Anyway, Barbara, I'm rambling, so go ahead.
You're just talking about more. I wasn't at EduCon in Detroit, but I know the speaker, Charlie Todd, set up an event, or kind of a surprise event where all the attendees hummed together. And I just think I can't imagine anything more simple and more human and less consuming than to just see what it feels like to have hundreds of people humming together. And so I just thought less is more.
Mm.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
The science behind that, I think, I'm guessing, is probably very similar to an
Yeah.
which I love. I love, for people listening, I'm a lover of yoga, and I feel like the at the end of a class is like my favorite connection point with the other people in the room. And it's always funny. The is very different with a new group than it is with a group that's consistently meeting, and it's always kind of fun to see what the energy of the is going to be like. So I imagine with a group that large, like a hum is going to be a similar feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, that's like thinking what a wonderful world that was done at Convene last year. That was so powerful. Really.
Yeah.
I was like, I was feeling like I was choking. I'm like, why am I so emotional?
Yeah.
And I know it did not translate for the online participants, but being in the room, it was, wow, it
Yeah.
was something.
We did write about that. So we can maybe post that in the show notes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I wasn't there either, but somebody who was there wrote that they had never before cried at the beginning of a conference, and standing there with so many people singing that song moved them to tears. So
Yeah, it was quite something. And also, I just want to relate it back to what we were discussing before in terms of attendees wanting more. I think one of the questions that is very powerful for attendees to ask themselves prior to going to an event is, why am I going there? What do I want to achieve? And I'm not sure if that's always the case. That I don't want to assume, of course, but I know for myself, I've not always asked myself this question. And when being asked by others, then I'm like, why am I really going there? Like, what's the real reason? And don't say the fluff of, I just want to network. I just want to see what, I mean, what's really drawing you to that event?
Yeah.
And if planners can get their hands on the answers, well, I think that will solve many of their problems in terms of building events that people really want to attend.
yeah,
Because they can
I'm
program for
thinking,
that, right?
yeah. What if you just had like a big bowl as people were leaving that had a sign that said, "Did you get what you want? Did you get what you wanted?" And say, write down if you did or you didn't.
I like
Because that
that.
would be very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe just having it throughout the event, not at the end, because you know
Yes.
you'll get your code late from the code check, and then you'll be like,
And
no,
yes,
I did not
that's not
achieve.
very practical. That would be a big line there. I think throughout was better.
But I wanted to read one of these quotes that I think sort of sums up everything about what we've been talking about in a good way, and about how everybody needs to be experimental in this time of change, or because like the research that you mentioned, Barbara, it really does show that people want something different. I mean, I remember some of those stories and I think I was in Ken's session when they were presenting some of that research, and it was a lot of people saying, I want something to go differently, to be different. But I love this quote that Tina Piccioni, sorry if I did not pronounce that. Piccioni? What?
Picconi, probably.
I don't know. From Google. She says, you cannot stop change or progress. You must learn to constantly question everything, which I think is true. When someone says that is the way we have always done it, I simply ask why. Is that really going to work? What outlandish, crazy idea can we try that is different? If it fails, fail fast and move on. But if you do not try, this industry will be left behind. And I think that works in any industry and in any kind of thing. When I worked at Red Eye in Chicago, it was an experimental newspaper, and we had the same philosophy about if it fails, fail fast and move on. And we did that, and I love that philosophy. I love that in life too. So Maggie, back to you.
We all agree that there's a lot to change in the world of events, even though event professionals are stressed out and with limited resources, there's still sacred cows that can be removed.
Maybe they can slay that stress by going after a sacred cow.
You'll find the links of the things we mentioned in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, do give us a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more industry insights, visit pcma.org/convene. Until next time.